The bullet tore through Clara Jensen's shoulder, just as the sun dipped below the ridge, painting the Colorado sky the color of fresh blood. She staggered backward against the doorframe of her modest homestead, her rifle clattering to the weathered wooden porch as 3 riders continued their assault on her land. It was September of 1881, and these men had come demanding she sign over her water rights to the cattle baron, who'd been buying up every ranch in the territory. Clara had buried her husband 2 winters past, raised their son alone until consumption took him that spring, and she would be damned if she'd surrender the only thing she had left to her name. The riders fired again, splintering the doorframe above her head as Clara pressed her hand to the spreading warmth across her collarbone. Blood seeped between her fingers, hot and insistent, and the world began to tilt sideways. She could hear them shouting, their voices growing bolder as they realized she was hit. Her vision swam as she tried to reach for the rifle, but her legs gave out and she crumpled against the door. Through the haze of pain, Clara heard a new sound, rapid hoofbeats coming hard from the eastern trail. A single rider appeared over the rise, and the crack of his Winchester repeater split the evening air. The 3 men at her fence line wheeled their horses around, surprised by this interruption. Another shot rang out, and one of the raiders cursed as his hat flew off. The lone rider charged forward with a fury that sent all 3 men scrambling for retreat, firing as they fled into the gathering darkness. Clara's consciousness flickered like a candle in the wind. She felt strong hands lift her, heard a deep voice speaking urgent words she couldn't quite grasp. When she managed to focus her eyes, she found herself looking up into the weathered face of a man she'd seen around St. Elmo a handful of times. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and worry creased the corners of his hazel eyes as he examined her wound. "My horse," she whispered. "They shot my horse too." "I know, madam," the cowboy said, his voice steady despite the blood covering his hands. "I am going to get you to Doc Morrison in town. Can you hold on for me?" Daniel Whitmore had been riding back from checking fence lines on the property he worked when he heard the gunshots echoing across the valley. He'd pushed his bay gelding into a gallop without a second thought, driven by an instinct he couldn't name. Now, as he pressed his kerchief against Clara Jensen's wound and felt her blood soaking through the fabric, he realized how close she'd come to dying alone out here. "I need to apply pressure," he said, meeting her pain-glazed eyes. "This is going to hurt." Clara nodded, her face pale in the twilight. When Daniel pressed down firmly on the wound, she gasped but didn't cry out. Her jaw clenched, and he saw the steel beneath her fear. He'd heard about Clara Jensen, the widow who refused to sell her 160 acres despite every threat and offer thrown her way. Seeing her now, bleeding on her own porch while defending what was hers, Daniel felt something shift in his chest. "I am going to lift you onto my horse," he said. "Then I am going to climb up behind you and hold this wound closed the whole way to town. It is about 6 miles. Can you stay with me for 6 miles? "I can try," Clara managed, though her voice was growing weaker. Daniel scooped her up as gently as he could, but she still whimpered at the movement. His horse, a steady gelding named Copper, stood perfectly still as Daniel maneuvered Clara into the saddle. He swung up behind her, pulling her back against his chest and immediately replacing his hand over the wound. The pressure made her gasp again, but he held firm. "I have you," Daniel said close to her ear. "I promise I will not let go." He urged Copper into a smooth lope, fast enough to cover ground but steady enough not to jostle Clara too badly. His left arm wrapped around her waist, holding her secure, while his right hand maintained constant pressure on her shoulder. Blood continued to seep through his fingers, warm and slick, and Daniel pressed harder. Clara's head lolled back against his shoulder, and he could feel her trembling. "Stay awake," Daniel said firmly. "Talk to me. Tell me about your homestead." Clara's breath came in shallow gasps. "My husband built it in '73. We came from Missouri, had good water, good grazing. He died 2 years ago, pneumonia." "I am sorry," Daniel said, and meant it. "What about family back east?" "All gone," Clara whispered. "Had a son. He died this spring. Consumption." Daniel felt the weight of her losses settle over them both. Here was a woman who'd endured more grief than most could bear, and still she'd stood her ground tonight against 3 armed men. The courage that took staggered him. "Those men will face justice," Daniel promised. "Sheriff Taylor is a good man. He will not let this stand." "They work for Raymond Cross," Clara said, her voice fading. "He owns half the territory. What can anyone do?" "The right thing," Daniel said. "Laws still mean something in Colorado, even if men like Cross think they are above them." They rode through the deepening night, and Daniel talked to keep Clara conscious. He told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to break horses from his father, about drifting north after his parents passed and finding work on various ranches. He'd been in Colorado for 3 years now, working for a decent outfit that ran cattle in the high country. He'd saved most of his wages, dreaming of buying his own piece of land someday. Clara listened, or seemed to, though her responses grew fewer. Daniel could feel her growing heavier against him, her body relaxing in a way that terrified him. He pressed harder on the wound, feeling the blood pulse against his palm, and urged copper faster. "Clara," he said sharply. "Clara, stay with me now." "Tired," she murmured. "I know you are. But you do not get to quit. Not after standing up to those men. Not after everything you have survived. You hear me." The lights of St. Elmo appeared in the distance, flickering in the darkness like earthbound stars. The town sat in a valley surrounded by mountains, a mining community that had grown into a proper settlement over the past decade. Daniel could make out the main street, the shapes of buildings, the glow from windows. Doc Morrison's office was on the north end, above the general store. "Almost there," Daniel said. "Hold on just a little longer." Clara's eyes had closed, but she managed a small nod. Daniel could feel her heart beating against his arm, rapid and thready. Too fast. She was losing too much blood despite his efforts to stanch the flow. He kicked Copper into a gallop, no longer concerned about the rough ride, focused only on reaching help before it was too late. They thundered down the main street, scattering the few people still out at this hour. Daniel pulled up in front of the general store and shouted for Doc Morrison before his horse had even stopped. Lights appeared in the upstairs windows, and within moments the doctor emerged, a lantern in hand. "Gunshot wound," Daniel called out. "She has been bleeding for near on an hour." Doc Morrison, a grizzled man in his 60s with steady hands and sharp eyes, took in the situation immediately. "Bring her up," he commanded. Daniel dismounted carefully, keeping pressure on Clara's shoulder even as he pulled her down from the saddle. He cradled her against his chest and carried her up the narrow stairs to the doctor's office, following the lantern light. The examination room smelled of carbolic acid and soap, clean and antiseptic. Daniel laid Clara on the table as gently as he could. "Step back," Doc Morrison said, already cutting away Clara's blood-soaked dress. "I need room to work." "I promised I would not let go," Daniel said, his hand still pressed to her wound. The doctor looked at him sharply, then his expression softened. "You did good, son. You saved her life getting her here. But I need you to step back now so I can finish the job." Daniel forced himself to release the pressure, to step away even though every instinct screamed at him to stay close. His hand was covered in her blood, his shirt soaked with it. He backed up against the wall and watched as Doc Morrison examined the wound with practiced efficiency. Bullet went clean through, the doctor muttered. Missed the bone, missed the major vessels. She is lucky, lost a lot of blood though. Will she live? Daniel asked, his voice rougher than he intended. If infection does not set in, and if I can get the bleeding fully stopped, yes. Doc Morrison threaded a curved needle. This will take some time. You should go get cleaned up, get some rest. I will wait, Daniel said. The doctor glanced at him again, something knowing in his eyes, but he just nodded and turned back to his patient. Daniel watched as he cleaned the wound, as he stitched the entry and exit holes with careful precision, as he bandaged Clara's shoulder with clean white cloth. She remained unconscious through it all, her face pale as milk in the lamplight. It was well past midnight when Doc Morrison finally stepped back, washing his hands in a basin. She should make it through, he said. Fever is the danger now. I will watch her tonight, but if you want to help, you can sit with her tomorrow. Having someone here talking to her, keeping her present, that can make the difference. I will be here, Daniel said immediately. Figured you would be. The doctor dried his hands. You know her well. I do not know her at all, Daniel admitted. I just happened to hear the shots, happened to be close enough to help. Doc Morrison studied him thoughtfully. Seems to me there is not much that is just happening here. You rode 6 miles holding a wound closed without letting up. That takes something more than chance. Daniel had no answer for that. He looked at Clara, so still on the table, her golden hair matted with sweat and blood, and felt that same inexplicable pull he'd experienced the moment he'd lifted her off her porch. He barely knew this woman, yet the thought of her dying had filled him with a desperate urgency he'd never felt before. Get some sleep, Doc Morrison said kindly. Come back in the morning. I will take good care of her. Daniel nodded reluctantly and made his way out into the night. He found a room at the boarding house, cleaned himself up as best he could, but sleep refused to come. He lay awake watching shadows play across the ceiling, thinking about Clara's courage, about the grief she carried, about the determination in her eyes even as she was bleeding out. When dawn broke, Daniel was already dressed and heading back to Doc Morrison's office. The doctor looked tired but satisfied when he opened the door. She made it through the night, he said. Fever started around 3, but it broke just before sunrise. I think she is going to pull through. Relief flooded through Daniel so powerfully it nearly buckled his knees. Can I see her? She is sleeping, but yes. Sit with her. Talk to her if she wakes. She needs to stay still and let that wound start healing. Clara looked small in the narrow bed, her injured shoulder heavily bandaged. Color had returned to her cheeks, though, and her breathing was deep and even. Daniel pulled a chair close and sat down, unsure what to do with his hands. He settled for resting them on his knees and just watching her, grateful to see the rise and fall of her chest. Hours passed. Doc Morrison came and went, checking on his patient, bringing Daniel coffee and breakfast he barely touched. Around midday, Clara's eyelids fluttered. Daniel leaned forward instinctively. Clara, he said softly, can you hear me? Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they found his face. You, she whispered, the cowboy who saved me. Daniel Whitmore, he said, and you saved yourself. I just helped get you to town. You held the wound, Clara said, memory clearly returning, the whole way. I remember that, your hand pressing so hard it hurt worse than the bullet. I am sorry for the pain, Daniel said, but I could not let you bleed out. Do not apologize. Clara tried to shift and winced. I am alive because of you. You need to stay still, Daniel said quickly. Doc Morrison says the stitches need time to set. You lost a lot of blood. Clara closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, focusing on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. Why did you come? Last night when you heard the shots. I do not rightly know, Daniel admitted. I just knew someone needed help. You could have been killed. There were 3 of them. They were not expecting company. Once I started firing, they scattered like rabbits. A ghost of a smile touched Clara's lips. You are either very brave or very foolish. Probably some of both, Daniel said, and was rewarded with a soft laugh that she immediately regretted, gasping at the pain it caused. Easy, Daniel said, half rising from his chair. Do not make me regret making you smile. Clara breathed carefully until the pain subsided. Tell me something, she said. Tell me about you. I want to hear a voice that is not talking about fevers and stitches and wounds. So Daniel talked. He told her about breaking his first horse at age 12, about learning to rope from an old vaquero in Texas, about the time he'd gotten thrown into a stock tank by a particularly ornery bronc. He told her about the mountains he'd crossed and the rivers he'd forded, about sleeping under stars so thick they looked like scattered salt. Clara listened, her eyes never leaving his face, and slowly some of the pain lines around her mouth eased. You have never stayed in one place long, she observed. Never had much reason to, Daniel said. My folks are gone, no brothers or sisters, just me and whatever ranch would hire me on. That sounds lonely. It can be, Daniel admitted, but it is simple. No complications, no one depending on me, no one to let down. Or no one to let you down, Clara said quietly. Their eyes met, and Daniel felt that pull again, stronger now. Maybe that too, he agreed. Doc Morrison appeared in the doorway. How is our patient? Awake and talking, Daniel said. That is a good sign, right? The best sign. The doctor approached to check Clara's bandages. No fresh bleeding, fever stayed down. If you can keep still for a few days, Clara, I think you will make a full recovery. A few days. Clara tried to sit up, and Doc Morrison pushed her gently back down. At least a week before you should even think about going home. That wound needs to knit properly, or you will tear it open again. I cannot stay in town for a week, Clara protested. I have a homestead to protect. Those men might come back. I will ride out to your place, Daniel said. Make sure it is secure, tend to whatever needs tending. Your livestock, your property, I will watch over it. Clara looked at him with surprise. You do not owe me that. Maybe not, Daniel said, but I am offering anyway. Why? Clara asked, and there was something vulnerable in the question that made Daniel choose his words carefully. Because what those men did was wrong. Because you deserve help. And because I want to. Clara studied his face for a long moment, and Daniel had the feeling she was seeing more than he intended to show. Finally, she nodded. Thank you, Daniel Whitmore. I accept your offer. Then it is settled, Doc Morrison said. Daniel keeps your homestead safe. You stay here and heal. No arguments. Daniel spent the rest of that day with Clara, talking when she had the energy, sitting in comfortable silence when she needed to rest. As evening approached, she drifted into a natural sleep, and Daniel finally let himself leave, heading to the sheriff's office to report what had happened. Sheriff Tom Taylor listened grimly to the account, his weathered face hardening as Daniel described the attack. Raymond Cross has been pushing hard to consolidate all the water rights in this valley, he said. But this crosses a line. Attempted murder, that is something I can act on. Will you, though? Daniel asked. Clara said Cross owns half the territory. He owns a lot of land, that is true, but he does not own the law, not while I wear this badge. The sheriff stood, settling his gun belt. I will ride out to Clara's place with you tomorrow, document what happened, look for evidence. Then I will have a conversation with Mr. Cross about keeping his men on a shorter leash. Those men might not have been acting on his orders, Daniel pointed out. Maybe not directly. But Cross creates the conditions that make men think they can get away with such things. He bears responsibility either way. Daniel left the sheriff's office feeling marginally better. He retrieved copper from the livery, checked into the boarding house again, and tried to get some rest. Tomorrow would be a long day, riding out to Clara's homestead and back. But tonight, as he drifted toward sleep, his last thoughts were of Clara's eyes watching him, the way her face had softened when he'd made her laugh, the courage it took to defend her land against impossible odds. The next morning, Daniel met Sheriff Taylor at dawn, and they rode out together toward Clara's property. The homestead sat in a valley with good water from a spring-fed creek, just as Clara had described. The house was modest but well built, with a barn, a chicken coop, and several corrals. Daniel could see immediately why Cross wanted this land. Water was gold in cattle country, and Clara's creek never ran dry even in the worst summers. They found evidence of the attack everywhere. Bullet holes riddled the front of the house and barn. Clara's horse lay dead in the corral, bloating in the morning sun. Spent shell casings littered the ground near the fence line where the 3 raiders had positioned themselves. Sheriff Taylor collected the casings, photographed the scene with his camera, and took notes in his leather journal. "This is clear-cut," the sheriff said. 3 armed men attacking a lone woman on her own property. The law is on Clara's side, no question. "Will that matter if Cross has the judges in his pocket?" Daniel asked. "Judge Henderson is honest. He does not take bribes, does not bend to pressure. If this goes to trial, Clara will get a fair hearing." Daniel spent the rest of that day tending to Clara's property. He buried her horse, fed her chickens, checked the fences, and made sure her house was secure. He found the water rights documents in a lockbox, along with the deed to her land, all legal and proper. Everything about Clara's homestead spoke of care and hard work. She'd maintained this place alone for 2 years after her husband died, working from dawn to dusk to keep it going. The respect Daniel felt for her deepened with every hour he spent walking her land. That evening he rode back to St. Elmo and went straight to Doc Morrison's office. Clara was awake, propped up with pillows, looking stronger than she had that morning. "How is my place?" she asked immediately. "Secure," Daniel assured her. "Your chickens are fed, your fences are checked, your house is locked up tight. Sheriff Taylor documented everything. He is building a case." Clara's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you again." "I will keep riding out there," Daniel said. "Make sure everything stays in order while you heal." "You have your own work to get back to," Clara protested. "I cannot keep taking your time like this." "I spoke to my boss," Daniel said. "Told him what happened. He said to take whatever time I needed. Good men are hard to find, and he knows I will come back." "Will you?" Clara asked quietly. "Come back to work for him, I mean." Daniel pulled the chair close to her bedside and sat down. "I have not thought much past making sure you are all right," he admitted. "But yes, I suppose I will." "It is good work, steady pay." "But not your own land," Clara said. "No, not my own." They looked at each other, and Daniel felt the air between them change, charged with possibility and unspoken questions. Before either could say more, Doc Morrison bustled in with a dinner tray for Clara. "You need to eat," the doctor said. "Build your strength back up, and you," he pointed at Daniel, "need to eat as well. You look half-starved." Daniel realized he had not eaten properly since before the shooting. His stomach growled in agreement, and Clara laughed, then winced. "No more making me laugh," she said. "It hurts too much." "I will try to be dreadfully boring from now on," Daniel promised, and that made her laugh again despite herself. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Daniel would rise early, ride out to Clara's homestead, tend to whatever needed tending, then return to town to sit with her through the afternoon and evening. They talked for hours, sharing stories, learning each other's histories. Daniel discovered that Clara had been a schoolteacher before she married, that she loved to read but rarely had time for it anymore, that she made the best apple pie in 3 counties, according to her late husband. Clara learned that Daniel had a gift with horses that bordered on magical, that he carried a harmonica but was too shy to play it for anyone, that he dreamed of having a place where he could breed and train horses rather than just breaking them for other men's ranches. "You should do it," Clara said one afternoon. "Buy land, start your horse operation. You have the skill and the knowledge." "Takes money," Daniel said. "More than I have saved even after 3 years of steady work." "How much more?" Daniel shrugged. "Hard to say. Depends on the land, the buildings that are already there, how much stock I could start with. Maybe another 2 or 3 years of saving if I am careful." Clara was quiet for a moment, her fingers plucking at the quilt covering her lap. "What if you did not have to buy land? What if you had a partner who already owned it?" Daniel's heart began to beat faster. "What are you saying, Clara?" "I am saying I have good land with reliable water. I am saying I cannot work it alone, not at full capacity. And I am saying that you have been kinder to me, more helpful than anyone has been since my husband died." She met his eyes directly. "I am saying maybe we could help each other." "That is a business proposition," Daniel said carefully. "It could be," Clara agreed, "or it could be more. If you wanted it to be." The honesty in her voice stole Daniel's breath. He had felt the connection growing between them over these past days, but he had not dared to name it, to acknowledge the way his pulse jumped when she smiled, or the way he looked forward to seeing her more than anything else in his day. "I am a drifter," Daniel said slowly. "I have never stayed anywhere long, never let myself care about anyone too much. What makes you think I would be any different now?" "Because you rode 6 miles holding a wound closed," Clara said simply. "Because you have spent every day since making sure my homestead is safe. Because when you look at me, I see something in your eyes that I have not seen in a long time. Hope, maybe, or possibility." Daniel reached out and took her hand, careful of her injured shoulder, her fingers curled around his, warm and sure. "I am scared," he admitted. "Scared of staying, scared of caring, scared of messing this up." "So am I," Clara said. "I lost my husband, lost my son. The thought of opening my heart again terrifies me, but I keep thinking about what you said about not letting those men win, about not giving up. Maybe that applies to more than just my land. Maybe it applies to this too." Daniel lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Then let us be scared together," he said, "and see what happens." Clara smiled, and it transformed her whole face, making her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with features and everything to do with the light that suddenly blazed in her eyes. "I think I would like that very much," she said. Over the next several days, as Clara continued to heal, they talked more seriously about the future. Daniel would become a full partner in Clara's homestead, contributing his savings and his labor. They would expand the horse breeding operation, using Clara's good grazing land and Daniel's training skills. And they would do it together, not just as business partners but as something more, something that was still taking shape between them but felt solid and true. Sheriff Taylor visited with news about the case. Raymond Cross had denied any knowledge of the attack, of course, but 2 of the 3 men involved had been identified and arrested. They were being held in the territorial jail in Leadville, awaiting trial. The 3rd man had fled the territory and was wanted for attempted murder. "Cross is rattled," the sheriff said with satisfaction. "He knows this could blow back on him badly if the men talk. He has been keeping his head down, not making any more aggressive moves. I think the message got through." "Will Clara be safe?" Daniel asked. "I believe so. Cross is smart enough to know that anything else that happens to Clara now would point straight back to him. And with you on her property, she is not alone anymore. That makes her a harder target." Daniel felt the weight of that responsibility settle on his shoulders, but it did not feel burdensome. It felt right. He wanted to protect Clara, wanted to build something with her, wanted to see where this unexpected connection might lead. 10 days after the shooting, Doc Morrison finally cleared Clara to leave his care. "The wound is healing well," he said. "You still need to take it easy for another few weeks, but you can recover at home just as well as here. Just keep it clean, change the dressings daily, and for heaven's sake, do not try to do any heavy lifting." Daniel brought a wagon to carry Clara back to her homestead, padding the seat with blankets so the journey would not jar her too badly. As they rolled out of St. Elmo, Clara looked around at the mountains surrounding them with an expression of relief and homecoming. "I miss this," she said. "Miss the space, the quiet." Town was feeling pretty small, Daniel agreed. Too many people watching, wondering what was happening between the widow Jensen and the drifter Cowboy who saved her. Clara glanced at him with amusement. "Let them wonder. We know what is happening, and that is enough." When they reached the homestead, Daniel helped Clara down from the wagon with exquisite care. She walked slowly to her porch and stood looking at her land with eyes that shone with tears. "I almost lost this," she said quietly. "I almost lost everything." "But you did not," Daniel said, coming to stand beside her. "You are still here. We are still here." Clara turned to him, and without thinking, Daniel cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her. It was soft and careful, mindful of her injury, but it held all the emotion that had been building between them since that first desperate ride to town. When they parted, Clara's eyes were bright. "I think this is really happening," she whispered. "I think it is," Daniel agreed. They went inside together, and Daniel got Clara settled in her rocking chair by the window while he made coffee and heated up the stew a neighbor had left. Over the next weeks, they fell into the rhythm of living together, learning each other's habits and quirks. Daniel rose early to tend the stock and work on repairs around the property. Clara, as she grew stronger, returned to her own routines, cooking and mending and managing the household accounts. In the evenings, they sat on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, talking about their plans for the future. "I want to start with a small herd of mares," Daniel said one evening. 5, maybe 6 good quality animals with strong bloodlines. We can breed them to a solid stallion, raise the foals, break them gentle. Horses trained right from birth fetch a premium price. We would need to expand the corrals," Clara said, "and build a proper training pen, maybe a shelter for foaling." "All doable," Daniel said. "It will take time, but we have that now." Clara reached over and took his hand. "We do not we? Have time, I mean. We have all the time in the world." Daniel squeezed her fingers gently. "I still cannot quite believe this is real. That I am here with you, planning a future instead of just drifting to the next job." "Does it scare you?" Clara asked. "Sometimes," Daniel admitted. "But mostly it feels right. Like I was wandering for years trying to find something, and I did not even know what it was until I found you." "I feel that too," Clara said softly. "After I lost my husband and son, I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I would just work this land until I could not anymore, then sell it and live out my days somewhere quiet. But then you rode over that ridge and everything changed." They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to appear. An owl called from the pines, and somewhere in the distance a coyote yipped. The night was cool and clear, perfect in a way that made Daniel's chest ache with the beauty of it. As summer turned to fall, the case against the 2 captured raiders went to trial. Daniel and Clara traveled to Leadville to testify, and the courtroom was packed with spectators eager to see if Raymond Cross would face any consequences. The evidence was overwhelming. The spent shell casings, The photographs of the bullet damage, Clara's testimony about the men demanding she sign over her water rights, it all painted a clear picture. The two men were convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. Cross himself was never charged, but the verdict made it clear that his tactics were no longer acceptable. On the ride back to St. Elmo, Clara was quiet, processing the closure the trial had brought. "It is really over," she said finally. "I can stop looking over my shoulder, stop waiting for them to come back." "You can," Daniel agreed. "And we can focus on building what we want to build instead of just defending what you have." That night, sitting by the fire in Clara's cabin, Daniel pulled out his harmonica. Clara looked up in surprise. "You are going to play for me?" she asked. "Seems like it is time," Daniel said, suddenly shy. "If you want to hear it." "I do," Clara said warmly. "Very much." Daniel played a slow, sweet melody he'd learned from an old cowboy in Texas, a tune about longing and homecoming. His fingers found the notes easily, and the music filled the small cabin with something achingly beautiful. When he finished, Clara had tears on her cheeks. "That was lovely," she said. "Will you play another?" Daniel played several more songs as the fire burned down to embers, and Clara listened with her eyes closed, a small smile on her face. When he finally set the harmonica aside, she reached for his hand. "Stay with me tonight," she said quietly. "Not on the porch, not in the barn. Here with me." Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything," Clara said. He helped her to her feet, mindful still of her healing shoulder, and followed her to the bedroom. They undressed each other slowly in the moonlight streaming through the window, exploring with gentle hands and whispered endearments. Daniel was careful of her injury, but Clara was insistent, pulling him close, showing him without words how much she wanted this, wanted him. Afterward they lay tangled together in her narrow bed, skin cooling in the night air. Daniel traced patterns on Clara's back, marveling at the softness of her, the reality of her beside him. "I love you," he said, the words coming easily now. "I do not know when it happened exactly, but somewhere between the shooting and now, I fell completely in love with you." Clara turned to face him, her eyes shining in the darkness. "I love you too. I think I started falling that first night when you held that wound and promised you would not let go. You kept that promise, Daniel. You are still keeping it." "Always," Daniel said fiercely, "for as long as you will have me." "Then I hope you are prepared for a long wait," Clara said with a smile, "because I am not letting you go either." Winter came to the Colorado high country with a vengeance, burying the valley in snow and driving them inside for days at a time. But the cabin was warm, stocked with provisions they had put up during the fall, and Daniel found he did not mind being snowed in with Clara. They spent long evenings reading aloud to each other from Clara's small collection of books, playing cards by lamplight, making love in the warmth of their bed while the wind howled outside. On a clear day in January, Daniel rode into town and returned with the circuit preacher. The man married them in Clara's small parlor with Doc Morrison and Sheriff Taylor standing as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, but when Daniel slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, a simple gold band he'd bought with his savings, she cried tears of joy. "I did not think I would ever do this again," she said, looking up at him with wonder. "Did not think I would ever feel this way again." "Neither did I," Daniel said, kissing her gently. "But here we are." "Here we are," Clara echoed and sealed the promise with another kiss. Spring brought a thaw and renewal. Daniel began the work of expanding the corrals and building a proper training facility. Several of Clara's neighbors, impressed by Daniel's skill with horses and grateful for how he defended one of their own, came to help with the construction. The community, which had kept a respectful distance from the widow Jensen, welcomed Daniel warmly and by extension opened their arms to Clara as well. In April, Daniel traveled to Denver and purchased 5 good-quality mares from a breeder going out of business. He brought them home carefully, taking his time on the journey so as not to stress the animals. When Clara saw the horses, she laughed with delight at their beauty and spirit. "They are perfect," she said, running her hands over a dappled gray mare. "This is really happening, is not it? Our dream." "Our dream," Daniel confirmed, pulling her close, "and it is only the beginning." The mares settled in well, and by summer one of them was confirmed in foal. Daniel worked with the horses daily, gentle and patient, earning their trust. Clara managed the business side of the operation, keeping careful accounts and building relationships with potential buyers. Together, they made a formidable team, and word began to spread about the quality of horses coming from the Jensen Whitmore ranch. On a warm evening in August, Clara told Daniel she was pregnant. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, and she simply took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "We are going to have a baby," she said softly. Daniel felt the world tilt and resettle. A baby. His child. Their child. The enormity of it stole his breath. "Are you all right?" Clara asked, suddenly anxious. "I know this is fast. We have only been married 7 months, but I thought you would be happy." "Happy?" Daniel found his voice. "Clara, I am more than happy. I am overwhelmed, terrified, and so full of joy I might burst from it. A baby. Our baby." Clara's face relaxed into a radiant smile. "Then you are ready to be a father." "I have no idea what I am doing," Daniel admitted, "but I am willing to learn. With you, I am willing to try anything." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall and into winter. As Clara's belly grew round, Daniel found himself constantly amazed by the miracle of it, by the life they had created together. He built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving small horses into the headboard. Clara sewed tiny clothes and blankets, preparing their home for the new arrival. In February of 1883, on a snowy night with wind howling around the cabin, Clara went into labor. Daniel rode through the storm to fetch Doc Morrison, and the old doctor came willingly despite the weather. The labor was long and difficult, and there were hours when Daniel paced the cabin floor, listening to Clara's cries, feeling helpless and afraid. But finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, a baby's cry split the air. Doc Morrison emerged from the bedroom with a tired smile. "You have a son," he announced. "A healthy boy with a good set of lungs." Daniel rushed past him to Clara's side. She lay exhausted in the bed, her hair matted with sweat, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she'd sewn. When Daniel looked down at his son's face, red and scrunched and perfect, something fundamental shifted in his soul. "He is beautiful," Daniel whispered, touching one impossibly small hand with a gentle finger. The baby's fingers curled reflexively around his, and Daniel felt tears streak down his cheeks. "He is perfect, Clara. We should name him," Clara said, her voice hoarse but happy. "What do you think of James?" "After my father, James Whitmore," Daniel said, testing the name. "I like it." James Daniel Whitmore. "Perfect," Clara agreed, and they sat together marveling at their son until exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into sleep. The years that followed were full and rich in ways Daniel had never imagined possible. Young James grew strong and curious, toddling after his father around the corrals, learning to ride almost before he could walk properly. The horse breeding operation flourished beyond their initial dreams. Daniel's reputation for producing well-trained, even-tempered horses spread throughout the territory, and buyers came from as far as Cheyenne and Santa Fe to purchase their stock. Clara proved to be not just a capable business manager, but also a natural saleswoman, charming buyers with her intelligence and straight talk. Together, they built the ranch into one of the most successful operations in the region. They added more land when a neighbor retired and sold out, expanding their grazing range and water access. Daniel hired on 2 young cowboys to help with the increased workload, teaching them his methods of gentle horse training. In 1885, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, after Daniel's mother. The little girl had her mother's golden hair and her father's hazel eyes, and she was the darling of the household from the moment she arrived. James, now a serious 3-year-old, appointed himself her protector, and could often be found singing to her or bringing her wildflowers from the meadow. The family attended church in St. Elmo regularly, and Clara resumed teaching at the small schoolhouse for a few hours a week once Margaret was old enough to be minded by others. She loved sharing her knowledge with the valley's children, and Daniel loved watching her light up when she talked about her students. The community that had once kept the widow Jensen at arm's length now counted Daniel and Clara as pillars, respected and valued. Raymond Cross eventually left Colorado, his land empire crumbling under debts and legal troubles. The men he'd employed scattered, finding honest work or moving on to cause trouble elsewhere. The valley became a more peaceful place, and the memory of that violent night when Clara was shot faded into local legend, a story told to newcomers about how the Whitmores came to be. On a spring evening in 1890, Daniel and Clara sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. James, now 7, was teaching 5-year-old Margaret how to rope a fence post, demonstrating with the patience and care he'd learned from his father. Inside the cabin, their 3rd child, a boy named Thomas born the previous winter, napped peacefully. "You ever think about that night?" Clara asked, leaning against Daniel's shoulder. "The shooting, the ride to town." "Sometimes," Daniel admitted. "Mostly I think about how close I came to not being there, to riding a different direction or leaving an hour earlier. All the small chances that could have meant I never heard those shots." "But you did hear them," Clara said. "You came over that ridge like an avenging angel and changed everything." "We changed everything," Daniel corrected. "You were the one brave enough to defend your home. You were the one who survived, who healed, who offered me a partnership when you did not have to. I just followed where you led." Clara laughed softly. "I think we both know that is not entirely true, but I like how you remember it." Daniel pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you, Clara Whitmore. I love this life we have built, these children we are raising, this dream we turned into reality." "I love you too," Clara said. "More than I can ever properly say. You gave me a second chance at happiness when I thought that door was closed forever." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in brilliant colors. James successfully roped the fence post and Margaret cheered, her voice carrying clear across the yard. From inside came the small sounds of Thomas stirring from his nap. The horses whinnied in the corrals, settling for the evening. Everything was exactly as it should be. Daniel thought about the man he'd been before that September evening in 1881, the drifter with no roots and no real direction. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different lifetime. The person he'd become in the years since, the husband and father and rancher, felt more authentically himself than anything that had come before. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked, tilting her head to look up at him. "That I am the luckiest man in Colorado," Daniel said simply. "That I found you, found this, found home." "We found each other," Clara said. "And we built this home together day by day, choice by choice. That is not luck, Daniel. That is love and hard work and commitment." "You are right," Daniel agreed. "As you usually are." Clara smiled and snuggled closer. "I am glad you have finally learned that lesson. It only took 9 years." Daniel laughed and wrapped his arm more securely around his wife, holding her close as their children played, and the mountains stood eternal watch over their valley. The bullet scar on Clara's shoulder had long since faded to a thin white line, but neither of them had forgotten the night that brought them together. It was their origin story, the crucible that forged their bond. From violence and fear and desperate courage had come this beautiful life, this family, this future they continued to build together. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Daniel called the children inside for supper. They came running, laughing and breathless, James swinging Margaret by the hands while she shrieked with delight. Inside the warm cabin, Clara dished up stew while Daniel got Thomas settled in his high chair. They ate together around the table Daniel had built with his own hands, talking about their days and making plans for tomorrow. After the children were bathed and tucked into bed, Daniel and Clara returned to the porch for a final few minutes of quiet before sleep. The night was cool and clear, perfect for dreaming under the stars. "You think they will understand?" Clara asked. "Our children, when they are grown, do you think they will understand what we survived to build this for them?" "I think they will know they are loved," Daniel said. "That is the most important thing. Whether they fully understand our story or not, they will know they came from love." Clara nodded, satisfied. "That is enough. That is everything." They went inside together, banking the fire and checking the children one last time before retiring to their own room. In the darkness, they held each other close, two people who had found unexpected grace in the midst of violence, who had chosen love when it would have been easier to remain alone, who had built something lasting from the ashes of their separate griefs. "Good night, my love," Clara whispered. "Good night," Daniel replied, kissing her softly. "I will see you in the morning." And morning would come, as it always did in the mountains, breaking gold and bright over the peaks. There would be horses to train and children to raise and a ranch to run. There would be challenges and setbacks and moments of doubt. But there would also be laughter and joy and the deep satisfaction of work done well. There would be love, constant and sure, the foundation on which everything else was built. Daniel Whitmore, who had once been a drifter with no home and no purpose, had found both in the arms of a woman brave enough to defend her land and generous enough to share it. Clara Jensen, who had lost everything and refused to surrender, had found a partner worthy of her courage and a love strong enough to heal her wounded heart. Together they had created something neither could have achieved alone: a family, a legacy, a life worth living. The ranch would continue to prosper in the years to come. James would grow up to take over the horse breeding operation, expanding it even further with his own innovations. Margaret would become a teacher like her mother, founding the first permanent school in St. Elmo. Thomas would prove to have a gift for working with cattle and would eventually start his own herd. All three children would marry and have children of their own, filling the valley with Whitmores who carried forward the values their parents had instilled. But that was still to come, written in the future that spread out before them like the valleys and mountains of their Colorado home. For now, on this quiet night in 1890, Daniel and Clara simply held each other and rested in the peace they had earned. The journey from that desperate ride holding a wound closed to this moment of domestic tranquility had been long and sometimes difficult. But every mile of it had been worth traveling, every challenge worth facing, because it had led them here, to home, to love, to each other. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Two souls who had found each other against impossible odds and chosen, every single day, to keep choosing each other. That was the real story, the one that would echo down through generations. Not the violence that brought them together, but the love that kept them together. Not the wound that nearly killed Clara, but the healing that came after. Not the desperate ride through the darkness, but all the bright days that followed. They had taken the worst thing that had happened and transformed it into the best thing, turning tragedy into triumph through sheer determination and grace. And as they drifted toward sleep in their comfortable bed, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, both Daniel and Clara knew with absolute certainty that they would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every frightening moment, every difficult choice, every sacrifice and struggle, all of it just to arrive at this perfect place together. Home. Forever.